Hello, I'm Richard. In my last video I fixed this video Genie. Go and check it out if you haven't already. I say fixed, I identified 340 chips which I borrowed from a working machine. So it will be fixed once I've ordered replacement parts so that those parts can go back in the other machine. Today I'm going to be looking at this other broken Genie, which might be really simple because it might have very similar faults. So what I've learned yesterday, it might be a walk in the park, or it might turn up its own challenges. And to be honest, I'm not really sure which I prefer. Do I want an easy life or do I want a learning experience? Well, let's find out which it is. I'm quite intrigued by this machine that I'm going to be working on today. It's a little bit different to the other machine. It seems to have a different version of the video interface board. Particularly it's got quite a few extra socketed chips, as well as the video RAM being socketed and the character generation ROM. It's got some of the extra logic chips socketed. So does that mean that they were faulty in the past and been replaced, or were they just socketed from the factory? I don't know. And the actual layout of the board is just slightly different, and the video RAM chips have got different model numbers on, although they were compatible with the old machine because I swapped them out to this one. The other thing, quite apart from horrendous amounts of dirt inside here, it's got a homemade mod on the side here. So we've got a speaker, we've got a control there, and then some cables running over to the cassette interface board, cassette and video interface board. It's got one wire that's coming onto the RF modulator. That might just be getting a ground wire. So there's two things I can think of with this, given the speaker and what's probably a volume control. It could be a monitoring speaker for this cassette deck, because the later models had a view meter and a volume control. So this one over here has a view meter and a volume control to allow you to get better reliability on playing back your recordings. This is an earlier model that didn't have that, so it might be that's what it's adding, that it's got a volume control for the built-in cassette deck and a speaker so you can hear what level it's at as you adjust it. The other possibilities, it could be a audio output sound mod, because it was common for software of the era to use the second cassette output. So it's got a built-in cassette, but you can have two cassette decks. So they would often put out waveforms, a square wave, on the external cassette port, and then if you plugged an amplifier into that, you could get very simple sound. So it's possible that this is all connected up to the second cassette output to give you audio output with corresponding volume control. I guess we won't find that out until I get it working. The technique I used on my last repair that worked quite well was to swap out components out of the non-working machine and put them into the working machine, and then see what stops it working. So that worked really well, so let's try it here. Now the thing that turned out to be wrong with this machine was the Z80 CPU wasn't working. So I've taken out the working CPU out of there. I've taken out the unknown CPU from the dead machine. So let's carefully put this in and see whether this CPU works, because that would be a very quick fix if it is. Quite difficult to get into the sockets. That's not going in cleanly. Oh, we've got one slightly bent pin there. Let's see if we can get that back out. It's looking good now. I hate doing these really large number of pin chips. Which is why I left the CPU to last in the previous repair. Sure if that's in. I'm going to pause for a moment and straighten these pins properly. Right, we've got that in now. It's a bit tougher than I'd hoped. Let's see if that makes any difference. See what happens. Aha! That looks like we've got a dead CPU because we're getting garbage with that, whereas everything else is known to be working that machine. So let's try putting the good CPU in the poker machine, see if that fixes it. I've now got the known good CPU in this machine. I also had to reinsert the video RAM because I'd stolen 2 RAM chips to fix the other machine. So let's see what happens with this. Oh, I haven't got this machine plugged in yet. Always worth doing. Let's see what it does. Hey! That is looking good. Is that it? Is that all we had to do, is swap over the CPU? I might run a few tests just to check the video RAM's all working, but that's looking good. In which case we can move on to looking at what this mod is. So it's looking like we may have another fault to fix. So I went to investigate what this modification is. And my first thought is, let's try playing a tape to see if it's a monitor for what's coming out on the tape. So I've got a tape out of the other machine, some random software tape, put it in, press play. Now this is, the deck is kind of remotely controlled under software with a relay, but this F1 button, rather badly named on the keyboard, turns on and off the power to cassette deck. So we put that on and nothing is happening on the tape deck. When we press the F1 button, the light comes on here and you can hear the relay here is clicking. So maybe there's a broken cable, the power isn't getting through. Maybe the fault in the motor, maybe the fault in the switches. So I need to start taking some stuff apart and checking what's what. I just noticed something interesting when I got down closer to this, looking at the CPU board. It's unrelated to the fault, but looking at the dynamic RAM here on the CPU board, this one down here is different from all the rest. All the others are just marked Malaysia. Oh, I can't read that at this distance. This one's an ITT chip, and this is date code 80 week 41, and all the others are 80 week 12, which also matches the date codes on the ROM. CPU, remember this isn't the original CPU because I got it out of another machine. That's date code 81 week 17. That was the working one out of the Genie 2. It probably kind of dates the Genie 2 a bit. And we've got a 78 week 51 up there on one of the logic chips. And similar over here we've got like 79. And the SRAM in the video memory is all 1978, which is interesting. Maybe they're sitting on the shelf for a while. Anyway, back to diagnosing this cassette deck problem. So I might have found what this cassette problem is. So here's the cassette header. Supposedly this is 0 and 9 volts and in and out for the signal to the cassette deck. I've got my multimeter on here. We are getting 4.2 volts and not 9 volts. So yeah, that's suspicious. I might just grab out the other Genie and plug this into the header on there and see if this deck works with the other machine. Excuse the rather convoluted arrangement here. This is the only way I can get this to reach the header on the other board, and the keyboard's not held down. But I've now got this cassette deck powered off this machine. If I turn it on here, you can hear the cassette deck whirring. Don't know if we can improve anything with this volume control. not hearing anything. You'd expect to hear static if that was monitoring that cassette deck, which makes me think that mod is probably a sound mod rather than monitoring the cassette deck. But that's proved the cassette deck's okay. It is indeed the power supply, the 9-volt power supply on this interface board that's not delivering the full juice. So let's have a look at that. And it just occurred to me I was wrong with a little statement there about what this mod board might be, because of course if it is trying to monitor this cassette deck, it's getting its signals off this interface board, and this cassette deck was just plugged into that interface board, so I couldn't get anything useful about the about what that's about just from that last test. I did have a look at what it's connected to. It's got one connection into the RF modulator, and then it's got two connections into these two logic chips, a red wire here and a black wire there. So when I'm looking at the schematics of this board to work out what's going on with the power supply, I might have a look at what it's connected into, try and work out what it is. I could cheat because there's lots of schematics of common mods for these machines online, so I could go and look at that and work, but it'd be nice to figure it out for myself. So I've done a bit of reading up in the schematics of the power supply for the interface board, and it's all in this section up here. You can see here these components here, those little thing, and Q10 there, which, looking at the schematic up in this corner here, they haven't used any voltage regulators on this board. They've rolled their own power supply circuitry, so we've got this bit for generating 9 volts and this bit generating 12 volts, all from a 16 volt input. So we've got 2 transistors, a couple of resistors, a diode and a capacitor, which I've tracked down to being this power transistor here, this transistor here, this electrolytic capacitor here, and a diode and 2 resistors underneath the cable. And indeed, if we get the multimeter on this power transistor, get a ground over here, then the output here, which should be 9 volts, is 4.4 volts, which is roughly what we were seeing on the connector. So it seems to be a fault here, and we're, I think I noticed on here, we've got like 19 volts coming in here, so presumably we have got enough voltage coming in from the other board. I mean, it's nominally a 16 volt rail, I think. So I certainly don't have any transistors that I can swap out. I've got very few electrolytic capacitors. That might be the first thing to try, because capacitors age, and the circuit is working, it's just giving the wrong voltage. So that maybe means the transistors are okay. I'm not sure what the failure modes of transistors are, but I would have thought they'd have been just either work or not, rather than doing that. So maybe the most suspicious thing is that electrolytic capacitor. I'll go and have a look in my box of spares. I think it was 100 microfarad, but I've only just got a few odds and ends that I've salvaged out of other kit. I've never bought a whole kind of kit of replacement electrolytics, generally because they're quite expensive to get like a whole load of stuff that you don't need. So I'll go and have a look, see if there's anything I could swap out. So here's my little collection of electrolytic capacitors. Nothing quite like the 100 microfarad I need there. I've got a 10 microfarad. I've pulled off some broken kit. I've got a whole load of 220s, which isn't quite right. Those all came with kits of X2 capacitors for BBC micro power supplies, but I ended up using a lot of the kits on other power supplies other than BBC, so I didn't need the electrolytics. Got 1000 microfarad there that came with something. But I do have this. Yeah, that's a 100 microfarad, but it's a 450 volt monster. Again, I bought that. I think that was for the Osborne power supply that I fixed, and ended up the capacitor in it looked fine, so I didn't bother changing it. But yeah, that's kind of like complete overkill for there, and a complete waste of. I mean, that was about £1.50 or £2 just for that capacitor, so it'd be a shame to waste that in there. So I think it's a case of ordering in some bits. So get the capacitor, maybe have a look for those transistors as well. While I'm at it, get these are all my dead ones, the legs in the air to symbol like a dead insect. So I need a couple of static RAM for video board, 2 dead Z80s. Those were both date codes 1980. There's the working one with the 1981 date code out of the Genie 2. So a bit of shopping, and then see if anything of this arrives for next weekend and carry on. Before I finish, I just went back to have a look at this this kind of speaker mod to work out what's going on. And this chip here, I looked at the data sheet, and that's just getting a ground off there. And this red wire off the modulator, I was assuming that's probably just a positive power, and multimeter gives me a plus 4 volts from that. So it looks like those red and black are just going to power this, which I haven't really looked at that too much, but that seems to be like a transistor and some resistors and something else. That's probably just like a little amplifier circuit. And the only other thing is this other red wire comes to this 74LS175, which is a flip-flop, which is Z6 from looking at the board layout, and the schematic, which gets us down to this little bit here. So Z6, and it's connected to pin 15, which is basically this output. And following it seems this output, it depends on the relay, so that's this relay here that also powers up the cassette drive, internal cassette drive. So one branch puts 9 volts, well, if we had 9 volts, onto the internal connector, and the other branch takes the output of this flip-flop and either sends it to the inbuilt cassette or sends it to the external cassette output, this DIN plug on the back. And that kind of makes sense. They've just had to have one flip-flop that can drive either cassette, but not both at the same time, and it uses this relay to determine which cassette it goes to, which is under software control. If you try and do a load, or you can override it to do manual use of the cassette deck using the F1 button there. But so that looks like this mod here is feeding in directly into the output, the cassette output, which is for either cassette drive, which suggests that it is both of my hypothesized functions, so that it looks like it will monitor the sound to either the internal or external cassettes, which also means it, as well as monitoring this for playback and playback setting, playback volume, it also probably work as a sound output. In fact, it's probably most likely to be just used for the sound card, because this volume control is not feeding back anything, I don't think, unless there's a connection in there that I haven't seen yet. So it's not actually, the volume control is not actually modifying the volume of the cassette that's being played back. It's outputting what's going from the board to the cassette and not changing the chord volume. So I don't think it's for more reliable tape loading. I think it's just to monitor the sound on the tape, so you can know if you're in the right place, and also for using the output of the flip-flop as a very simple sound card. And as I'm editing that, I just realised that I was wrong yet again, because of course that's only monitoring the output from that flip-flop, so what's coming from the computer to the cassette. It's not playing back, it's not putting output of what's coming off the cassette into the computer. So when you play back the cassette, you're going to hear nothing, but when you record a program, presumably you will hear what's going into the cassette. So that seems to imply it's only useful as a sound output for games and stuff. So there we have it for this evening. A moderately successful repair. Managed to fix all the digital circuits in here, so we have a working computer. It's just the cassette deck isn't working. So the next repair is going to be the analog electronics on there. I've never really done any repairs on analog electronics without just following a guide. So that will be an interesting little experiment. So yeah, at least we can end on a reasonable high. We have a working digital computer, but we've still got something to look forward to in the next instalment once I've done some shopping. Thank you for watching.